The salmon arrived dead on the plate, skin dulled to pewter, asparagus slumped like it had given up hours ago. Steam rose everywhere else, not here. At table 7, the air smelled faintly of bleach and hot dishwater from the kitchen doors that swung and sighed beside us. I slid my fork under the fish the way you'd coax a sleeping animal, and the tines scraped porcelain loud enough to turn a head. No one looked. The room glittered in 100 places that weren't mine. Crystal stems catching chandeliers, sequins blinking like satellites, a band humming something soft enough to excuse expensive conversation. My name card sat at the edge of the tablecloth, as if even the paper knew to keep its distance. Across the room, my son stood shoulder to shoulder with his new family, handsome in a tux that fit like a decision. The mic hadn't reached his hand yet. He didn't need it. His laugh carried over the clink of cutlery, warm and effortless, the sound I used to live for. He had gone to every table but ours. I told myself stories while I waited. He's busy. He'll come last because he's saving the best. He can't see me in this corner shadow. The stories ran out about the time the fish cooled to truth. When he finally took the microphone, he didn't look my way. He thanked hosts and friends and florists and the weather itself for cooperating. Then, to Barbara, voice pitched for the nearby tables but swept farther by the room's perfect acoustics. "Did you see they finally brought my mom her food?" His chin lifted in my direction, a little lantern guiding eyes to the back. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind, so she won't mind." Laughter sprinkled the head table, neat as sugar. Barbara's sounded like a glass cracking in the wash. My fork found the plate and stayed there. I kept my spine straight the way you do when a doctor presses cold metal to your ribs and tells you to breathe. Margaret, the kind-eyed woman whose name I had just learned, touched my sleeve under the table. "That's not right," she whispered, and the words shook like a candle flame. I took a sip of water that tasted of ice and polish and swallowed carefully, because dignity is a narrow throat. The first dance came and went, then parents floated into the lights, her father turning her in a circle of practiced pride, her mother leaning into my son's shoulder like the world had come true. No one came for me. The band slid into something I knew from old radios, and my palms remembered steps I'd practiced alone in a living room that smelled of carpet cleaner and secondhand hope. I stood, smoothed the emerald fabric over my hips, and walked toward the lobby. The coat check ticket tore with a tender rip, a small goodbye. Outside, the night pressed soft and expensive against the hedges. I could still hear laughter through the doors, bright and weightless. I held my keys, felt their familiar teeth, and understood I had one thing left that belonged only to me: choice. Tell me, if the person you love most laughs when the world forgets you, do you stay and finish the cold plate, or do you finally push back your chair? The invitation hadn't just arrived in the mail that March afternoon. It had landed like a verdict. Cream card stock, gold letters, and my son's life written out in a font so elegant it almost disguised what it said. I wasn't needed. Not in the planning, not in the choosing, not in the story of how he was stepping into adulthood. I was a name on a guest list, and names on lists can always be moved, downgraded, ignored. I stood at my counter with the envelope open beside the stack of late notices from the gas company and my credit card. The contrast felt deliberate, like some cruel set design. On one side of the counter, embossed perfection, luxury pressed into paper. On the other, the reality of a woman working data entry in an office that smelled of burnt coffee. A woman who rationed groceries by price per ounce and knew how many miles she could squeeze from the last gallon of gas. The world Ryan lived in now didn't run on coupons or careful math. It ran on Barbara's family membership at the country club. That night I called him, my heart trying to believe that the distance was a mistake. "Congratulations," I said, layering every ounce of warmth I had into those syllables. But his voice came back through the line, distracted, divided, as if the phone was a second-place conversation he was tolerating while answering emails. When he said, "Just show up, okay? Wear something nice, but not too conservative," I heard what he really meant. Don't embarrass me. I pressed the phone to my ear a little harder. "Of course," I replied, steady even while the old ache spread in my chest. We didn't argue. We never did. Silence closed in when he hung up, and I stared at the invitation until the words blurred. Over the next 3 months, I turned my entire life into a savings plan for a single evening. Lunch became saltine crackers at my desk. Dinner became canned soup thinned with water. I walked to work, rain soaking through shoes whose soles had already surrendered because bus fare was better turned into wedding currency. My cable subscription was canceled. I told myself I didn't miss it. Every dollar funneled into a secret envelope tucked behind a cereal box until I had enough for one emerald dress, one pair of shoes, one appointment at the salon. The dress arrived in a department store bag that smelled faintly of perfume and newness. It was simple, understated, a deep green that made my eyes brighter when I tried it on in front of the cracked mirror. I smoothed the fabric and let myself picture Ryan's expression when he saw me walk in. Not just his mother, but a woman who looked polished, dignified. For a moment, I allowed hope to flicker. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hair freshly styled, makeup carefully applied, and met the gaze of a stranger. She was older, yes, but there was pride in her shoulders. Maybe, I thought, he'll introduce me to his in-laws without hesitation. Maybe, for once, I'll belong. Then came the drive. My Civic, washed until the paint dulled like sea glass, rattled into a parking lot lined with polished BMWs and Teslas. The valets barely glanced at me before moving on to the cars that deserved attention. Inside, marble floors gleamed under a chandelier, shoes clicking, laughter cascading through the air like coins tossed into a fountain. I walked slower, afraid that any sudden move might mark me as an intruder. I found Ryan at the staircase. He looked perfect, black tuxedo, confident posture, hair styled to near artistry. He was laughing at something Barbara's father said, his whole body leaning into belonging. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Not warmth, not surprise, resignation, a crack in the performance. "Mom," he said, voice neutral. "You look so handsome," I told him, and reached up the way I had 1,000 times when he was a boy, to straighten his bow tie. But he stepped back, enough to sever the gesture. "Thanks, you look nice." The pause bruised deeper than any insult. Barbara's father extended a hand. "You must be Ryan's mother, Tom Whitmore." I shook it, my voice polite, my name steady. "Catherine Morris." But before I could say more, before I could claim even a fragment of the moment, Tom turned back to Ryan, launching into golf stories as though I were already fading from view. I drifted away, invisible once again, until I found my place card at table 7, near the kitchen doors, tucked where the clatter of plates would drown any conversation. My table mates were Barbara's distant relatives, awkward in clothes that didn't fit their lives. Their presence was a relief. We were all misfits together. Then came cocktail hour. Ryan moved through the room like a politician, shaking hands, charming, stopping at each table. Each table but mine. I told myself stories again. He was busy. He'd come later. He'd save me for last. The hollow grew inside me as minutes stretched. By dinner, the hierarchy was clear. The head table served first, then the inner circles of family and friends. Plates steaming, garnished, fragrant. By the time servers reached table 7, the kitchen had run dry. Margaret, the kind-eyed great-aunt, received hers lukewarm. The others followed, then silence. "We'll be right back with more," the server promised. But 20 minutes later, my plate arrived cold. congealed. "Kitchen scraps," Margaret whispered with sympathy. I lifted my fork, smiled at the table. "It's fine. I'm just happy to be here." The lie tasted like metal. I chewed the cold salmon, each bite sinking heavier, each swallow more deliberate. And then Ryan's voice rose above the music. "Did you see they finally brought my mom her food?" He gestured toward me, grinning as if sharing a private joke with the whole room. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind, so she won't mind." Laughter cracked open at the head table, Barbara's like shattering glass, the others following in ripples. I placed my fork down gently, steady despite the earthquake inside. Margaret's horrified whisper reached me. "That's not right." But Ryan continued, thanking florists and caterers, his voice swelling with love for Barbara, gratitude for the Whitmores, appreciation for friends. No mention of me. No trace of the woman who had worked double shifts so he could swing a baseball bat, who had driven him to college in a car held together with duct tape, who had stood in every audience of his life until now. The applause at the end thundered, glasses clinked, guests wiped sentimental tears, and Ryan kissed Barbara like the world had aligned perfectly. I sat surrounded by empty plates, cold fish, and the echo of laughter that had carved me out of his story. When the parent dances began, I waited, still hoping. Barbara floated with her father. Ryan leaned into Barbara's mother. I waited. The band played a song I had practiced steps to alone in my living room, but the floor never opened for me. My son had forgotten, or chosen not to remember, that I was even there. Margaret's hand brushed my arm. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm perfect," I said. And for the first time that evening, the words weren't a lie. Perfect because clarity is perfect. Perfect because there's a finality to truth when it arrives. I stood, smoothed my emerald dress, and left. The night air was soft against my face. The hedges rustled under the landscape lights. Inside, music and laughter carried on without me. No one noticed my absence. Not Ryan, not Barbara, not anyone who had toasted to family and love while I sat unseen. Keys in my hand, shoes clicking on pavement, I felt the seed of something new. A question, steady and demanding. If love without respect is only leftovers, why was I still starving myself for it? The night air followed me home, clinging to the folds of my emerald dress, whispering of manicured lawns and marble halls. My apartment door shut behind me with the hollow click of a latch, and silence flooded in. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't pour a drink right away. I sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd bought secondhand years ago when Ryan was still small enough to color on its surface with crayons. The faint grooves of his childhood doodles were still there under the polish, ghosts of a boy who once thought I was everything. I rested my hands flat on the table and let the truth settle in. The truth was not that Ryan had forgotten to ask me to dance. It wasn't that he had been distracted or careless or overwhelmed by the spectacle of his own wedding. The truth was in his joke, the careless cruelty of it, the laughter that followed, the way his words stripped me of dignity in front of strangers. "You're used to leftovers." The line had cut so cleanly it cauterized the wound as it opened. For years, I had excused small slights, convinced myself he was busy, stressed, still growing. I had told myself that his distance was independence, that his thoughtlessness was immaturity, that one day he would see me not as a shadow behind him, but as a person beside him. That night, clarity came sharper than any knife. He wasn't going to change because I had never required him to. I had trained him to treat me like scraps. And sitting there in my too quiet apartment, I decided I would not do it anymore. I opened my laptop. The glow lit my face, reflected in the window, turning me into a double. One woman, hunched over keys, another watching from the glass. The cursor blinked at the top of a blank email. For a long moment, I let it blink. Each flash counted down to the moment I would draw a boundary for the first time in 30 years. When I began to type, my fingers moved steadily, each word a step away from the past. Ryan, I'm writing this while your wedding day is still fresh. The sentences unfolded with deliberate weight. I thanked him for the clarity he had provided, though the gratitude tasted strange in my mouth. I told him his joke had been honest in a way his compliments never were. He had said out loud what he had shown me in countless smaller ways. That I was an afterthought. That he expected me to be grateful for whatever scraps of time and attention and respect he tossed my way. Then I wrote the word no. Not in capital letters, not with exclamation marks. Just no, quiet and unyielding. No more 500 deposits each month. No more life insurance naming him as beneficiary. No more credit card for emergencies that had covered his indulgences more often than crises. And most importantly, no more assumption that the house he grew up in would someday be his. I wrote that I would sell it, not because I was vengeful, but because I wanted to live, travel, taste life I had postponed for decades. Every line was both confession and declaration. I admitted my own role. I had trained him to see me this way, to accept without offering, to believe I was endless. But the admission wasn't self-pity, it was release. By the time I finished, the clock read 3:47 a.m. The city outside was still, a few headlights sliding like ghosts across the ceiling through the blinds. I read the email 3 times, not searching for mistakes but savoring its precision. Then I clicked send. The whoosh of it leaving my outbox was quieter than I expected, but final all the same. I sat back, exhaled, and poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I had been saving for years. The cork had dried, splintered, but the taste was better than any celebration I had imagined. For the first time in decades, I slept without the ache of unfinished conversations. His reply came 2 days later. Mom, what the hell is this email? Are you having some kind of breakdown? I think you misunderstood what happened at the wedding. It was just a joke. Everyone was laughing, not just at you. You're being way too sensitive. The words scrolled down my screen, defensive, patronizing. He called me crazy, suggested therapy, invoked his father's grave as though memory could shame me into submission. He begged me to wait until Sunday so he could come over and talk like adults. He wrote as if authority rested naturally with him, as if I were the one who had to explain myself. I didn't answer. I deleted it. 2 days later, another email, sharper. Mom, I've been trying to call you for 2 days. Pick up your phone. We need to discuss this house situation before you do something stupid. I talked to a lawyer, and you can't just cut me out of my inheritance like this. Call me back. I had already changed my number. By the weekend, his tone softened again. Catherine, I'm sorry for what I said at the wedding. I was drunk. You know I love you. Let's work this out. I'll pay you back, but you can't sell the house. I have friends who'll buy it from you at a fair price. This time, I forwarded the email to my realtor with a single line. Please expedite the listing process. The house went on the market Tuesday. By Saturday, I had 2 offers, one $15,000 over asking, cash. When I signed the acceptance, the pen felt heavy, like a weapon-turned tool. Ryan's final email arrived Sunday. You win. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but congratulations. You've destroyed our relationship. Don't contact me again. I printed it, slid it into a folder labeled evidence. Not for lawyers, not for leverage, for memory. A record of who he was when the mask slipped, when love collided with money and respect proved optional. At the realtor's office, the banker raised her brows at the deposit check, $355,000 after fees. More money than I had ever touched at once, more than Ryan had ever imagined I controlled. I drove past the house once more, watching a toddler pedal a tricycle in the driveway where Ryan had once practiced basketball. I felt nothing, No nostalgia, no grief, just release. The consequences came swiftly. Barbara appeared at my door weeks later, polished and brittle, demanding I consider Ryan's reputation, offering repayment plans, bargaining with promises of inclusion. She sat at my table drinking instant coffee from mismatched mugs, trying to negotiate my motherhood as if it were a contract. "What if Ryan apologized?" she asked. "Really apologized? Would that make a difference?" "No." "What if we invited you to dinner? Made sure you felt included in our lives going forward?" "No." "Then what do you want?" "I'm not punishing him," I said. "I'm just not rescuing him anymore." The word no had become my compass, my shield, my first language of freedom. Barbara left frustrated, heels clicking like accusations down the hall. I returned to my half-packed boxes with the calm of someone who had survived the storm and was finally stepping into clean air. By the end of July, the house belonged to someone else. My life belonged to me. Savannah waited with its river and its moss-draped trees, with quiet streets where no one knew my son's name. And yet, the consequences of no did not end with the sale of a house or the closing of an account. They lived in Ryan's silence, in Barbara's desperate visit, in the ripple that spread through a family that had once thought me invisible. They began to see me not as a doormat or a safety net, but as a variable they couldn't control. That realization unsettled them more than any insult could have. In my small Savannah apartment, I unpacked slowly. 2 suitcases, a box of books, my laptop, sparse but sufficient. Each item placed was a reminder. I had chosen this. The first night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, listening to cicadas pulse against the warm night. Below, people laughed at sidewalk tables, strangers wrapped in their own stories. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for Ryan's call, for his approval, for his recognition. I wasn't waiting for anything. The email, the no, had opened a door I didn't know existed. And though Ryan believed it had destroyed our relationship, the truth was simpler. It had revealed the relationship for what it had always been. A one-sided contract. I had voided it with a single keystroke. I leaned back in the chair, let the air press warm against my skin, and thought, this is what freedom sounds like. The realtor's office had smelled like leather and money, but back in my apartment, the air smelled like cardboard and dust. Half-packed boxes leaned against the walls. I had stacked them in careful towers, but sometimes I caught myself staring at them as if they were accusations. What kind of mother sells the house her child grew up in? What kind of woman cuts her son off with a single keystroke? At night, when sleep ran thin, I lay on the couch and let those questions gnaw. That was when Barbara knocked. Through the peephole, I saw her standing straight-backed in designer heels, every hair in place, face set in professional calm. When I opened the door, she said my name like it was part of a meeting agenda. "Catherine." I stepped aside without invitation. She entered, eyes sweeping the half-empty shelves, the taped-up boxes, the stripped walls. If she noticed the shabbiness, she didn't comment. She sat when I gestured, crossing her ankles neatly, and accepted the mug of instant coffee I offered with a smile so brittle it could have cracked between her teeth. "I had no idea Ryan was so dependent on you financially," she began. "He never told me about the deposits, or the card." She lifted her mug, sipped, and let the silence hang heavy. "When I married him, I believed his savings reflected his discipline. If I had known..." She let the words trail, a practiced ellipsis. Would it have mattered? I thought. But she filled in the blank herself. "Of course it would have mattered. I don't believe in adults living on parental allowances. Now that I know, I'd like to work something out. A repayment plan." "There's nothing to repay," I said. "Those were gifts. Gifts I can no longer afford to give." Her composure tightened. "You need to understand what this looks like." Ryan's reputation at his company is suffering. He couldn't make a car payment last month and had to borrow from his boss. That kind of thing doesn't look good when promotions are on the line. I held my mug steady, steam brushing my face. "And the card," she pressed. "He had automatic payments linked, gym membership, courses, even part of our honeymoon. When it bounced, there were consequences. We had to move out of the loft. We're staying with my parents for now." That admission surprised me. The couple who had sparkled at the country club now reduced to a guest room. I almost pitied them. Almost. Barbara's mask slipped then, the polite smile gone. "Are you enjoying this?" she demanded. "Because it seems like you are." Her words hit harder than I expected. I'd told myself I wasn't punishing Ryan, only stepping back. But a part of me had felt grim satisfaction, knowing he was stumbling without my invisible scaffolding. The thought shamed me, and shame opened a crack for doubt. She leaned in, seizing it. What kind of mother takes pleasure in her son's suffering? What kind of woman sells the family home out of spite? That house was supposed to be his future. Everyone knows it. You're destroying him because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. I set my cup down slowly. My heart had begun its old frantic pounding, the rhythm I knew from years of conflict avoidance. The instinct rose sharp. Apologize, explain, backpedal. Say you'll reconsider the sale. Say you'll help him one last time. My chest ached with it. Barbara saw it. She softened her tone, persuasive now. What if he apologized? Really apologized? Would that change anything? We could invite you to dinner, include you more. We could start over. Her voice was honey poured over glass shards. For a moment, I pictured it. Ryan at my table, contrite, the three of us talking like family. I pictured forgiveness rising easy as breath. But then memory cut through. The country club chandelier, the laughter after his joke, the empty space where our dance should have been. Forgiveness couldn't erase those truths. I stood, the scrape of the chair loud in the small room. "No," I said. Barbara blinked. "No, no to the apology, no to dinner, no to rescuing him again." Something fierce steadied in me as I spoke. The crack sealed. Barbara rose too, bristling. "You're bitter. That's all this is? You're punishing Ryan because you failed in your own life. You'll regret it when you're alone and old." Her words stung because they grazed an old wound. I had built my life around Ryan so completely that I hadn't built anything else. But for once, the sting didn't weaken me. It clarified. I walked her to the door. Ryan's success was built on sacrifices he never acknowledged. His happiness was subsidized by my poverty. Now he will have to stand without me. She hesitated, eyes searching for softness, then gathered her purse with sharp movements and left, her heels snapping down the hall like gavel strikes. I closed the door. The apartment seemed smaller, emptier. For a long time, I leaned against the wood, heart racing, doubt tugging. Was she right? Had I gone too far? Was this cruelty dressed as strength? I carried that question into sleep, into dreams where Ryan was small again, crawling into my bed after nightmares. But morning came, and with it, light spilling across packed boxes, illuminating their blunt truth. I was leaving. I was not bending. The house closed 2 weeks later. The check cleared, and I packed my car with what little I wanted to keep. For the first time in decades, I turned the key not toward obligation, but toward myself. Driving south, highway lines slipping beneath me, I replayed Barbara's accusations. Bitter, spiteful, destroying my son's future. The words had cut at the time, but now they thinned in the rearview mirror. They weren't prophecy. They were fear. Her fear, Ryan's fear, that I might finally stop being the background of their story and start writing my own. By the time I reached Savannah, my pulse had slowed. The apartment I rented was small, but the air smelled of salt and moss. I unpacked my books, my clothes, my laptop, my life. And for the first time in 30 years, the word no longer sounded like a door closing. It sounded like a beginning. Savannah had taught me silence. Not the silence of being ignored at a wedding reception or forgotten at a dinner table, but the kind that held dignity. The river carried its slow hymn past the squares where Spanish moss swayed. In the mornings, I walked cobblestone streets to the bookstore, and in the evenings, I read on my balcony with cicadas droning like a metronome. No one here knew me as Ryan's mother. No one expected me to show up, to explain, to rescue. I was just Catherine, a woman with a part-time job and a quiet apartment, a woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. But Ryan's absence was never complete. He existed in the inbox I refused to check, in the buzzing of a phone number I had discarded. He existed in Barbara's desperate visit and in the lingering bruise of her words, bitter, spiteful, destroying his future. Sometimes, at night, those words pressed against me like a hand at my throat. Then I would remember the emerald dress, the cold salmon, the laughter. Clarity always returned. I had thought selling the house would be the end of it, but houses are not just walls. They are myths. To Ryan, that house had always been a certainty, a promise unspoken. My choice to sell it was not only financial, it was a revelation. The myth that his future was guaranteed collapsed the moment my signature dried on the closing papers. That was my counterattack, though I never called it that. I called it survival. The first ripple reached me through Barbara. Her visit had already shown me the cracks. Moving in with her parents, reputation slipping at Ryan's company, bills bouncing. My refusal to reinstate support had set the stage, but it was their own dependency that lit the fire. A week after Barbara left, Rita, the bookstore owner, handed me a slip of paper. "A man called," she said gently. "Said he was your son. He sounded desperate." I folded the note, placed it in my pocket, and later dropped it in the trash. That was another revelation. I wasn't required to answer. Silence could be an answer. 2 days later, Ryan arrived in person. He stood in the doorway of the bookstore looking smaller than I remembered, clothes wrinkled, eyes frantic. For a moment, the mother in me almost rose. Almost. Then I remembered his words. She's used to eating what life leaves behind. I let my face stay neutral. We met after work at the cafe next door. He had ordered a latte for me, extra foam, the way I used to drink it when we went to the mall together. The gesture was deliberate, a breadcrumb trail back to easier days. I sat, hands folded, eyes steady. He began with apology. Words smoothed over with practice. "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I want to start over." He said he had learned what mattered, that family mattered most. I listened. I let the apology fill the air, but I didn't accept it. "Interesting timing," I said. "You discovered the importance of family right when your financial situation became difficult." His expression flickered. He insisted it wasn't about money. But Barbara's visit had already told me the truth. He couldn't disguise the panic etched into his face. "What did you lose, Ryan?" I asked finally. "My mother," he whispered. Tears clung to his lashes. "You lost your safety net," I corrected. He cried openly then, shoulders shaking in the cafe's quiet corner. People glanced over with polite discomfort. I felt nothing. No instinct to comfort, no rush to reach across the table. For the first time, I let his pain be his own. "What can I do?" he begged. "Tell me what I can do to fix this." "Nothing." "There has to be something." "No," I repeated. The word was clean, solid. It had become the architecture of my new life. He pressed on, desperate. "I'll pay you back. I'll take care of you when you're older. We can make this right." I pulled my phone from my purse, scrolled through the photo gallery, and showed him pictures of my last few months. Cooking classes in Charleston, hikes along the Blue Ridge Parkway, Vermont leaves burning red against the sky. Me laughing, reading, living. "I've already made it right," I said. "I've been living. For the first time in 30 years, I've been living for myself instead of waiting for you to need me." His tears grew heavier, but I didn't flinch. "I don't need your repayment. I don't need your promises. I needed respect, and that will never come." Ryan collapsed forward, head in his hands. His shoulders heaved with sobs, raw and unguarded. It should have broken me, but instead, it steadied me, because the truth was shining there, in the wreckage of his pride. He was a man who had never learned to stand alone, and I was a woman who had finally stopped holding him up. He tried again. "Please don't leave like this." I stood, left the latte untouched. "I'm not leaving, Ryan. I left months ago. You just noticed." His sobs followed me out, but the Savannah evening was warm and forgiving. Jazz drifted from a restaurant patio. The sky glowed with the last light of day, and I walked slowly, breathing air that was finally mine. That night, back in my apartment, I replayed the confrontation. The apology, the tears, the desperation. I thought about the years of deposits, the overtime shifts, the sacrifices disguised as love. The secret bank that had underwritten his adulthood had closed, and with it, the illusion of his independence. The counterattack was never dramatic. It wasn't a slammed door or shouted accusation. It was quiet, surgical. Sell the house, cancel the card, end the deposits, live visibly, joyfully, without apology. The confrontation wasn't in my words. It was in my absence from his ledger, in my refusal to resume the old role. And the secret revealed was not just his dependency. It was mine. I had been addicted to his need of me, convinced it was love. I had mistaken scraps for affection, silence for independence, obligation for respect. Now, in the absence of those illusions, I was learning what it meant to exist without strings. Ryan would survive, or he wouldn't. That choice was his. As for me, I closed my balcony door against the night breeze, poured myself a glass of wine, and began sketching a list in a notebook. Italy, Colorado, a new language, a garden on a balcony. Not goals, not obligations, just possibilities. My own. The woman who had spent decades eating leftovers had finally cooked a meal for herself, and she wasn't sharing. The first morning after Ryan's visit, Savannah woke to fog rolling in from the river. From my balcony, the world looked hushed, softened at the edges. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug, the steam fogging my glasses, and felt something inside me I hadn't recognized in years. Peace without condition. Ryan hadn't called again. He might never. And for once, I didn't ache at the thought. I thought of him as a boy, standing on a little league field with a cap too big for his head, looking for me in the bleachers. I had cheered loudest, always. That memory used to pierce me like a knife. Now it rested in me like a photograph, true, but no longer alive. At the bookstore that afternoon, Rita asked casually if I had plans for the holidays. For decades, my answer would have been dictated by Ryan's schedule, what he needed, where he wanted me. But this time I said, "Not yet. Maybe Vermont again. Or maybe Rome." Her eyebrows rose. "Rome?" I smiled. "Why not?" It was then I realized the truth. I had stopped organizing my life around absence. No more waiting for calls that never came. No more rehearsing explanations for choices I never got to make. Instead, I was filling the pages myself. Hikes, books, recipes, languages. My story, finally mine. But freedom is not just escape. It's recognition. The recognition that love without respect is only dependence, That motherhood without boundaries becomes martyrdom. That silence sometimes speaks more powerfully than defense. Ryan had mistaken me for a permanent foundation. I had mistaken his need for proof of love. Both of us had been wrong. I don't hate him. I don't even wish him ill. I hope, in some corner of his marriage, in the long years ahead, he learns what respect costs. Maybe he'll recognize the difference between inheritance and earned security. Maybe not. Either way, that lesson is his, not mine. Mine is simpler. I deserve joy. That night, I booked a flight. Just one. New York to Florence. No return date circled. No itinerary beyond the first week. I wanted to walk cobblestones older than history, to stand in front of canvases that had survived centuries, to eat pasta that never touched a microwave. It wasn't about proving anything to Ryan or Barbara or anyone else. It was about proving to myself that a life delayed didn't have to be a life denied. As I closed the laptop, the fog outside had lifted. Streetlights glowed on wet pavement, and in their reflection, I saw not a woman abandoned, but a woman who had chosen. So, if you're listening to my story tonight, maybe you've sat at your own table 7. Maybe you've eaten cold scraps while the people you love laughed elsewhere. Maybe you've mistaken endurance for love. If so, hear me clearly. You are not leftovers. You deserve respect. You deserve a seat at the table, or better yet, a table of your own. And if you've carried someone until your back has bent, let this be the reminder that you can set them down. The ground won't collapse. Sometimes, the only way to teach love is to stop carrying the weight of another's choices. That's what I've learned. That's what I'll carry with me across oceans and seasons into the years that are finally mine. Thank you for listening, for walking beside me through this journey. If my story touched you, share where you're watching from, and join me here at Roots and Secrets. Like, comment, subscribe, so together we can keep telling the stories that remind us what respect, love, and freedom truly mean. Because in the end, the greatest secret is this: we don't need to wait for permission to live. Top of form. Bottom of form.